Hello everyone. So, I've just read chapter 13 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. Now, I have recorded my reviews of 11 and 12. I don't know which video is going to be going out first, this one or that one. I haven't started uploading those chapters yet. I read them yesterday, but I didn't upload them last night. They may come out today, they may come out, they may come out tomorrow. I just don't know which one's going to be coming out first, this one or the next one. Anyway, I've just read chapter 13, and I was right, we met the Twi'lek, and I couldn't remember her name, but before going into the chapter, but it's Laranth Tarak. And now that we learned a little bit about her, she's definitely going to stick. I hope she's going to stick in my mind. So Laranth Tarak finds Jax, and we're told a little bit more about Jax's past. About he's by some evaporators, and we're told that when he was a child, a youngling, and whispered to him that if you went onto the wing of a speeder or skimmer or whatever, while the evaporators were active, it would suck all the water out of you. And of course, he knows now that that can't happen, but he still is a bit unsettled whenever he goes by near evaporator because of that. Eventually, though, he hears a voice, and Laranth Tarak appears and says that he's dead, and she jumps down with her blaster drawn. And then she just says, "Well, you would be if I was a stormtrooper." And we're told that Jax wouldn't even have to have sensed her. He wouldn't even have to have seen her to know it was Laranth. And Jax just replies bitterly that it wouldn't have been a lonely death. And then Laranth realises that Jax has got his blaster drawn and says that, "Oh, you're getting quicker." And Jax replies that, "Well, he's always been this good." and we and then we're told a little bit about Laranth. Now, I knew the Grey Paladins were going to play a role in this book. I think they did originate from this book, from the Coruscant Nights, I'm fairly sure. But I did not know Laranth Tarak was a Grey Paladin. I was aware of a green Twi'lek in these books, but I wasn't aware that it was Laranth Tarak. I knew her name. It was just never stuck in my mind. Now it hopefully will. And we told a bit about the Grey Paladins, about how they're almost like the Tipo Paladins who prefer to not use lightsabers. However, like the Tipo Paladins, it sounds like they do use lightsabers, but they use them in addition to other weapons. The Grey Paladins don't use lightsabers at all. And we told a bit about how they generally believe that you shouldn't over rely on the Force. You should use it as minimally as possible and not rely on it. You know, they're not. As to my understanding, they're not saying to not use it, but they're just saying to use it to the minimum amount necessary. And that's kind of reflected in about how much, and from what we're told, that's kind of reflected in how they fight as well. They don't usually use the Force in fights, and again, unless it's necessary and to the minimum amount necessary. So I kind of knew all this, but it was great to kind of get, because of, people talking about the Grey Paladins, because you probably may know of them if you watch like lore videos. And of course Wikipedia, but it's always quite refreshing and more interesting to hear it from the source. So that was quite interesting, and luckily this did not drag on. It was only about 2 pages long. That's all it needed to be. It didn't drag on, and we weren't told. And to be fair, we were told more about the Grey Paladins than we were Laranth Tarak. But it's revealed that because the Grey Paladins are a very shoved out branch of the Jedi. They're not really, they're on the very edge of what's considered a Jedi. They that means Laranth Tarak is technically a Jedi. And then Jax tells her about Evan Peel, and we're told about how, despite how calm she looks, the threads that Jax sees around her can vary in colour. Well, the colour, what does it say? It's going to be easier to just read it out. He told her about Master Peel's death and his master quest. Though Laranth's chosen colour and code were of the Greys, the threads that wrapped around her were very seldom anything close to that cool and calmer hue. They were generally warm orange to fiery red, and sometimes when she was consumed with anger, she appeared swathed in a white-hot cocoon. Such was the passion with which Laranth lived, a passion that Jax sometimes envied. Though he was incapable of seeing the threads that enfolded himself, he was sure they did not burn nearly as hot as hers. So that's quite interesting to also learn a little bit more about Jax's, how he sees Force as well. You know, it tells us that, you know, the threads, the colour has meaning. So that's quite interesting as well. And of course we're told he can't see his own threads, but yeah, it's quite interesting that. Anyway, then they start planning and on how to get the droid, and Laranth says that the droid might have its memory wiped, or it may be taken for spare parts because it's in the Yam sector. And you know, Jax says that they have to operate under the assumption that it is still intact, but she's right, and they probably don't have a lot of time to find the droid, to find Bug Eyes. So he suggests looking for someone who kind of knows everything that's going on in the Yam sector. Who kind of treats people as who kind of just trades people like their merchandise and stuff. And we end the chapter with Laranth saying, "Oh, someone like Rocco the Hut." No, she doesn't say that, but you know, basically the same thing. And we don't see what Jax's reaction is, but I can only imagine what his reaction must have been to that. Given we know from chapter 4, Rocco is not necessarily someone you want to be going back to. But yeah, it was quite an interesting chapter, and I'm glad it was short. I'm happy it was short. It didn't need to. It knew it didn't need to drag on, and it didn't drag on. You know, this was a very well paced chapter. It didn't drag. It got to the point when it was talking about, you know, the Grey Paladins, and whenever it was giving us the lore, it didn't drag out the lore any longer than it needed to be dragged out. We kind of seen a bit more of Jax's character coming through. You know, about he's a little bit more, you know, he's a bit witty and stuff, and quite quick. I think you can also kind of tell that he's just kind of saying stuff to impress Laranth. I think you can kind of just tell with when he says that Rose always been this quick. That feels a bit more like a lie than an actual remark. But you never know, maybe it is true. And also this chapter reminds me that the way he keeps his blaster is in the sleeve. I was trying to remember, was it in a pocket, or because I thought it was in a pocket, but no, it's in his sleeve. But yeah, it was a good chapter. Laranth, it was nice that they kind of subverted expectations, you know, when she had a very, you know, cliche entrance, you know, where she seems to be very aggressive, not necessarily the good guy, but aligned with the good guys, and then it seemed like that, you know, Jax would eventually convince her to work with them, though it was nice to see that expectation subverted. it was almost felt like that expectation would have maybe been a little bit more fitting. But again, it was It was nice to see that expectation subverted and how she wasn't quite as oh, what's the word? Well, not quite in that archetype, and how she's still somewhat friendly to Jax. She's never said said that she's never really ever looked happy. She's never chuckled. She's never Jax has never even seen a smile. So she's definitely a very serious character. Though a lot of the time I just can't help but see a smile, and I think it's just because some of the stuff she says really just feels like they're really just playing up, the plot here. They're playing up what Jax has got going on here, and it seems like Laranth is intentionally playing that up to wind him up, even though she's not. I think it's just because of what we know of the plot. It feels like that, so I just can't help but imagine her smiling. So yeah, that's something I have to fix with trying when it comes to imagining the story. But yeah, it's also, I'm probably going to say we probably know more about Laranth's personality at the moment than Jax. Luckily, we did start to see a bit more of his personality coming through, and little quirks about him, like how he's afraid of evaporators. Again, how he seems a bit more witty coming through. How he, is immediately onto the investigative side. So when they finally get back onto track. So yeah, but as well with Laranth, we also I'd say we don't actually. I'll take back what I said about Laranth being more developed than Jax. I'd say they're probably equally developed at the moment. I think it mainly just is, we would we've been told quite a bit about Laranth that can relate back to her personality. How she doesn't seem very happy. Um, we we've seen she almost feels like Jax's mentor, but she isn't the mentor, if that makes sense. The way the dynamic they've got going on, Jax seems to be more of a is more like the friend, while Laranth feels as a mentor kind of feel to her, but she's actually the friend, if that makes sense. That's the best way I can put it. She feels mentorish, but also she isn't. She isn't the mentor, which I think is a really unique feeling. I have no idea how Michael Reeves has pulled that off, but it's a very unique feeling to her character. And I think it mainly just is the way, she was almost testing Jax at the start of the chapter where she had had her blaster pulled out on it. And then it goes straight into just it just goes into banter with friends, I think that's probably why she felt that way. And it's a really, again, it's a very interesting feel to a character, because that's something I don't think we ever see. I don't think we see that very often. So it was a very interesting, well, at least I haven't seen it at all. So it was a very interesting feel to a character. It was a very interesting feel, and it was also quite interesting to see that to be told that she does delve into her anger, which I think, on the one hand, also tells us quite a bit about the Grey Paladins and their views, and it also tells us a bit about Laranth Tarak as well, and we can kind of see that with how Jax, sees the threads around her. They're orangey, reddish, warm, and they can get white hot when she's angry. She's in the white hot cocoon. So yeah. Also, it sounds like Laranth hasn't had the best time. Apparently, she's had 10 centimeters of her leku shot off. No, she's got some scarring that could very easily be all sorted out by some Bacta, but they can't find. But it's not easy to find Bacta in the slums, in the Black Pit slums. So yeah. But yeah, this was an interesting introduction to Laranth. I had expected it to probably be her. As soon as I saw as usual, he didn't find her, she found him, and I saw Jax on there. I knew it was probably going to be Laranth, and it was Laranth. Um, but yeah, Laranth seems like she's going to be an interesting character, and I'm glad we've finally given Jax someone to bounce off of, because we really just need to see more of what he's like as a person. And this is going to hopefully tell us a lot more about who he is as a character. Now, I did have, now, side notes off the topic, because I think I'm done talking about the chapter now, but side notes off topic, I did check the ebook of Coruscant Nights 1, mainly just to look at the free sample, because I'm fairly sure the free sample on the ebook actually tells you how many chapters the book has, whereas, yeah, if you have the physical copy of the book, which is what I have, it doesn't tell you how many chapters there are on the first page. It's not like a page that tells you um how many chapters there are. But there is on the ebook. And apparently there's 46 chapters, and part 1 will end at chapter 21. So that's gonna be, good. Nice to know that about that. About I've got only about 10. No, not 10. 8 more chapters. Is it 8? Yeah, I think 8 more chapters to go. Before over with parts 1 and we're on to part 2, which is significantly shorter. I'm fairly sure that goes on until like 36 or 37. So yeah. And then, of course, we go in, and then we'll get on to part 3, and then we'll get to the end of the book at chapter 46. So yeah, I just had to check, because this part 1 is going on for quite a while, and I don't even know when it's going to end. I don't even know if there's multiple parts. I don't even know if it was only 2 parts or 3 parts. So I just had to check. So yeah. Anyway, that brings an end to this review. I don't have much else to say. So thank you all. Oh, yeah, it looks like we're going back to Tyke next chapter. I know he keeps being called Rahinian. I'm gonna keep calling him Tyke, because I'm gonna struggle to keep calling him Rahinian. But yeah, I think that brings an end to this review. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello, I've just read chapter 14 of Coruscant Nights, Jedi Twilight. So we pick back up with Tyke, and he's doing various stuff to try and find Jax Pavan. He's sent out operatives, both covert and overt. He's sent out cam droids to go over the Yam sector and try and find Jax Pavan. And it generally just doesn't really, nothing's really working. You find there are about 582,797,754 human males with the name Jax Pavan on Coruscant, and 8,674 Jax Pavans in the Yam sector. And he watches as the numbers increase and decrease from people who are arriving on the planet, leaving the planet, people who are being born, people who are dying. And we're told it's a common name among Corellians, and he just sees the fact that he's having to hunt a human, because they vastly outnumber the other species, and it's a lot harder to try and find them. And he needs to find Jax in short order, otherwise Vader's not going to be happy, and he just can't conceive the horrors he's going to put him through. And he starts looking at trying to match DNA samples out of desperation. Nothing really comes up. He can't really match any history. So then what does he do? I'm trying to remember. He expands the search parameter, and eventually a chime on the unit comes up, and he sees the fight between stormtroopers fighting Nick and Jax Pavan. And he sees Nick's face, but he can't quite tell whether who the other Jedi is. But he knows it's a Jedi because many of the images from the security cameras have him holding a lightsaber, and he does some research into the residence, and he finds that someone staying at the Coruscant Arms was called Jax Pavan. And of course, he knows that probably is the Jedi. And he says that there was probably no point in him trying to hide his name, considering how many Jax Pavans there are on the world with the highest population in the known galaxy. So he then decides, even though he can't match the face of the Jedi, he's gonna try. It looks like he's gonna try and find Nick Rostu. Go over to Nick Rostu. Sorry, you're getting out of breath. And we cut over to Nick Rostu, and he wants to just relax down for a bit. So he enters a salon. And he orders he has a couple of drinks, and he watches a Yavitha playing a game of Quarren, and then once the game's over, the Yavitha asks Nick to play, and he goes and plays the game, and we're actually told the rules of the game and how it's played. And actually, it does sound like quite a fun and interesting game, honestly. Anyway, the game's called Shrunker. I'm not going to go through all the rules because in that case, I'm probably going to waste your time reading an entire page of the chapter. Anyway, long story short, Nick wins the game. The Avitha is not happy because the Avitha generally do not give much attention to any other species and don't really consider them worth their time. This one seems open to other species, but they also don't really. They're also, just because they're open-minded to other species doesn't mean they're not aggressive. And because he loses, he pulls out his dew claw from his skin and is about to attack Nick, and he draws a blaster. The Viva just says, winds up bringing out a bunch of different insults. And Nick tells him that's not a good idea to insult someone who's holding the blaster at them. And then he feels a slug throw press up against his back. What does the guy say? And it's always a good idea to keep your back against the wall in a dive like this. Nick is just about able to figure out that it sounds like a human male voice, and then it's that's the last thought he will have for a while. He's not dead because of course he's in Mindor, but it sounds like he's gotten shot. It's a slug thrower, which is basically just a bullet, so there's not really any way to kind of minimise that. What is it with Nick getting into having all these sorts of injuries? It sounds like he almost lost his guts in Shatterpoint from what it sounds like. I haven't read the book, but from what it sounds like in Coruscant Nights, that's almost happened. In Shadows and Mindor, he's had a surgery in his brain to put Melt Massive in there. Now he's getting shot in the back. You just can't catch a break in any of the books. It's almost like it's mandatory for him to have some sort of injury. Or just, something that relates to his insights. But yeah, it was quite interesting to see Rahinian, doing that Tyke Rahinian doing his search. It was quite interesting to see, his methods and ideas. And we're being told about how Aloman are very skilled at, doing the unorthodox, thinking outside the box. And so that it was quite interesting to kind of see his methods. You can also feel his desperation. Again, it also says quite a lot about Vader, about how he's rescued him from slavery, but even he is not spared his wrath. And it's you can really feel his desperation, and then but we can't see the way he deceives himself into hope. at the end of the chapter, he hasn't had a good start to the search. You know, he was really starting to get into a panic because almost nothing was coming up surrounding Jack's Pavon. DNA samples, nothing really popped up, which, by the way, that actually came from the Jedi Temple. And something brought up in After the Jedi Death on Naboo was that I believe Malorum was part of the ISB, if I'm remembering correctly. Or I know it was part of something else before becoming an Inquisitor. And he found out that Anakin and Vader were the same from Jedi Temple recordings. So I am curious, has Malorum had some sort of involvement of bringing those DNA samples? I know it's never going to be confirmed, but it's just something where it's been, I wonder, I wonder if he had some sort of involvement in, going through the temple and stuff to do stuff like that. It's something that feels quite possible considering he was in the temple before becoming an Inquisitor. Anyway, um, again, it's quite interesting to see, how his different methods are. Again, we see his desperation and the way he deceives himself into hope of doing stuff, of trying to because again he's not had a good start to the search. He's trying to find it so he doesn't get punished through unimaginable tortures by Vader, and yet when he finds the lead, he tells himself that he's had a good start to the search. And I think it's mainly just his way of coping with the terrible situation he's in. He has to lie to himself, I think, and has to really tell himself, and has to really, make himself feel he's in a good situation. Otherwise, I just think he's just going to struggle mentally. And you can really kind of tell that in his character there. Again, it's very subtle things he does there, which says a lot about his character. We saw it in his meeting with Vader, and we're seeing it again here. We also told Jack's Pavon's a name used by both males and females. So that means it only, I think, the 500 million Jack's Pavons were only the males. So who knows how many there are females, and that only and how many females there are with that name, and that only covers the males on Coruscant. So it's a very common name, very common. So yeah, the Nick Rostu part of the book, it was just a good bit of fun, and I think that's what this book really just needed at this point. It just needed a bit of good fun. It has been very slow at points. It's been very serious for the most part. So just having a good, aside from Zender and I5, which have been comedy gold, but it was nice to just have a bit more, fun in the book, and something that's not really plot relevant as well. It is of course plot relevant because now Nick's, I'm assuming, he's got captured by the Empire, but it was nice to just kind of have a bit of a break from the main plot, and it was, again, it's just nice to have a bit of a break from being told these characters' backstories, this pacing being all over the place. The pacing in this chapter was really good. Sometimes the pacing's been a bit all over the place in the book. Sometimes it's been very slow and it drags on. Sometimes it's been it's been a really good pacing like this chapter. And so yeah, it was nice to just have a well-paced chapter. It was nice to have that. Again, considering how all over the place this book has been, and I think I've enjoyed the book, don't get me wrong, but I think it's, at the moment, you never know, it may change as we go on through it. It's just, at the moment, I feel like this book would benefit you having already read the series, rather than you going into this for the first time. Of course, there's no way you cannot read it for the first time. You have to read it for the first time at some point. But I think it's one of those books that really would benefit if you've already read it, because it's really just taken a long time to get into the character of Jack Pavon. There are other characters in the book who are well written, don't get me wrong, like Dender, I5, I mean, even Tyke's a good example. You know, they've got, you can kind of tell who their characters are. I still can't really tell you much about Jack Spaven. I can tell you a little bit now. Um, I can tell you a little bit since, I think, chapter 10 and chapter 13, I've done a good way, been quite good at telling you kind of like who he is as a person, because we've seen a lot more into his inner thoughts as well in other chapters, but just as a person, I can't really tell you much about Jack Spaven. Um, so yeah. Um, so anyway, um, I don't have much else to really say on this chapter. Aside from I quite enjoyed it. Um, and also this was a chapter that, at least in the Tyke part, the Rahinian part of the chapter, I didn't have to do much googling for the words. I did still have to do it quite a bit, don't get me wrong, but it wasn't nearly as much as what I usually have to do. It did start getting more googly in the second part of the book, of the chapter, sorry. Um, I did have to do a bit more googling once we got to the Nick Rostu part of the chapter, but it was nice to just kind of be able to just almost just go through the first, particularly the first 2 pages of the chapter. It was nice to almost just go through those first 2 pages without having to Google much, because I have the physical copy, not the ebook. So I'm relaxing back in my chair, come across the words, have to sit up, Google with one hand, or I've got the book in the other. So it can get a bit. I have to been having to do it quite a lot. So it was nice that there was at least that it just wasn't in its greater quantity this chapter. So yeah. Anyway, um, yeah, that brings an end to this review. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello. So I've just read chapter 15, and this is a very strange chapter, given we have two completely different things going on in this chapter. We pick up with Dender and I5, and I'm not going to drag this on. Basically, what it comes down to is Dender winds up suggesting to I5 to look into the main, to go into the data port and look into the mainframe after some thoughts and a chat between them two, and to try and find someone who looks like Lorne Pavan. And he does, and I5 does so, and he's able to find Jack Spaven quite quickly. And then after I5 explains that Jack Spaven will eventually be investigated, whether it's sooner or later, and that then says that, well, they got to look for him now then. And what does I5 say? I've gone way too far back. Oh, I5 then says that the rover cams have now been given higher priority to look for Jax, and you can look into the security grid again, and I assume see what the droids are seeing, and then we have about we have almost a 2 and a bit pages worth of exposition just telling us the scene and about the characters in the second part of the chapter, which is Kaird, where he and Prince Shizor have been summoned by Underlord Dal Perhi, and it turns out Kaird's plan hasn't worked at all. It turns out that Shizor had set him up into trying to take him down, and then he presented the evidence. Oh, and then Shizor presented the evidence to Perhi. And then once Kaird figures all of that out, Perhi dismisses Shizor. Kaird just kind of sits there in defeat because he realises he's never going to have that chance to go home unless there is an afterlife. And Perhi leans forward and puts his hands together and says, "Let's chat and let's talk," and that's where we end the chapter. Again, it's for the first part, Stender and I5. Of course, it's going to be good. again, I really like their dynamic. There are a couple beats in that part of the chapter as well, where Dender's trying to take out a an extrusion bed, and he just can't get it out. There's I5 says some when I5 asks how Den's gonna try and find Jax, Den explains that he's a reporter and he can locate almost anything. He hears everything, and it may have been a joke towards him being Celestin, given I think Celestins have quite big ears, if I remember. Not massive ears, not massive, but you know, quite a bit, quite big. And I5 says that he's surprised the clerk didn't register his ears as tenants, as well. Because they're staying in a they rented out they rented out a room for the night. And then in a bit of sarcasm, brings his clutches his chest, and what does he say? You wound me. That's what he says. And then of course it goes into all the lore, and then again I5 says something. It says a word which has a couple meanings, and that kind of all of a sudden clicks off the Lorne Pavan Jax Pavan match thing search. So again, it's just they got Zen and I5 just like have great banter. And the Caird bit, you just feel sorry for Caird. He just wants to go home. You know, he's got a few devious ways of trying to do that, but he just wants to go home. And I kind of hope, I really do hope, that it turns out Perhy is willing to let him go home. I really hope that's the case, but I have the feeling it's not going to be that. Because I really just want Caird to go home. You know, you can tell he just misses his home and wants to go there. And I actually, after I finished reading the chapter, went back to Caird's other chapters just to kind of have a quick look through some of the stuff they were saying, because if I will say anything, because of how, for lack of a better word, because of how exposition-y this book has been, it gets a bit boring. Again, for lack of a better word, it gets a bit boring at times, and some things just go through one ear, through and out the other. Just because it's at times really well paced, and then all the exposition tends to be really badly paced and extremely slow, and a bit of a snooze fest at quite a lot of the time. So I had to go back and try and figure out some of the stuff and what Caird's plan was. And yeah, I don't even fully understand it now. A specific part of it, I understand most of it, but then it brings up in the chapter where he gave when he gave Entrigorn the hypergem, it says that the new Underlords couldn't afford a crisis so soon, but it's never really made clear who it's meant to be. It says that Shizor's hoping to be a new Underlord, but there's nothing said about him becoming the new Underlord. He's been said to have been an Underlord almost since the Battle of Naboo. Not quite as far back as then, but still quite close as in like a year after. I'm fairly sure Caird was after the position, but I don't think he would have been in that position at that point yet. Of course, he evidently isn't. So I don't quite know what it means by new Underlords, because neither Caird or Shizor would be in the position, and He's been in the position for a very long time. And there was a boss that was brought up in another chapter. I don't remember his name. Maybe it refers to him. I don't know. It's saying Underlord, so I don't think it's one of the bosses. So yeah, that bit confuses me, and I still don't quite get it. But yeah. But I feel really bad for Caird, and I really do kind of just want him to get home. But yeah. generally there's not a whole lot to talk about with this chapter. It went on and on and on. There's really not a lot to talk about, honestly. I do wonder though, because of course Jax Pavan now knows Vader is looking for him. If, when, or if Zen and I-5, I think we know they're going to find him. But like, when they find Jax, are they going to be attacked by Jax because Jax may think Vader's sent them? Because again, he knows Vader's looking for him. He knows that. Apparently Nick told him. We didn't see it at any point in the chapters, but we have been told that he knows that Vader's looking for him because Nick told him. So that's going to be a bit of a, is he trying to be found by what's his name? Will Jax think I-5 and Zen are trying to find him? And that they work for Vader? It's going to be interesting to see that. And something that only really just crossed my mind, what does Kaird have anything to do with the story of Jax Pavan here? I assume it's going to at one point tie in, but it really is that, what is it? What, his storyline has nothing to do with any of the other storylines yet. So it's a bit confusing as to why we got him. I mean, I care about his storyline, that's good, but it's just, why have we got a storyline about this bird? So yeah, but yeah, again, I enjoy the chapter. It went on a bit, it did drag on a bit. I think the pacing could have been a bit better. Again, it's not, the thing is with the pacing of this book, it would be so easy to fix it. It doesn't need, because all you have to do is just shorten down. You just need to trim, it just needs to trim down everything it's saying. It doesn't need to go into these long explanations of what things are. It just needs to trim down what it's saying and just be more direct and to the point. And the pacing will be fixed. That's all it needs. That's all it needs to do to fix the pacing. Just trim down, be more direct, be more to the point, and the pacing will be fixed. You can say stuff in much less words, and you will still completely understand what you're trying to say. And I think that's just been my main complaint with the book so far. It's just the pacing can be a bit all over the place. And it mainly just comes down to how the exposition is being done. There's so much exposition, and the exposition is so long that it completely kills a lot of the pacing at times in the book. I mean, we had about 2 pages just telling us why Kaird and Prince Shizor and Perhi are at a table, and what the table is. You know, we don't need 2 pages just to be told all that, and just to be told why Kaird is a little bit suspicious. You know, we don't we don't need to have 2 whole pages and a little bit to just tell us that. You can do that in a lot less. You can just you could probably just do that in about a paragraph or 2. You don't need to extend it out like that. But yeah, it was, I think it did drag on at times, this chapter. Not as bad as other chapters, definitely not as bad as other chapters, but it did drag on. Anyway, that brings an end to this review. I'm surprised I dragged it out to 11 minutes, honestly. I thought it would have been probably under 10 minutes, but no. So yeah, thank you all for watching, and goodbye.